right there. Perfect.
Okay.
All right. Well, welcome. Thank you, Russell. Thank you so much for being here. We're super excited to have you as a guest here to talk a little bit about 1031s and educate us. As right when we start, here comes somebody. So I'll let Pamela in at the same time, and then we'll begin. And then I'm going to go ahead and give you the host right here so that you can share your screen and go from there. So make host. So Russell, you got it. So thank you, Russell. And go ahead and then please educate us. And that'd be awesome. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Eric. Greatly appreciate the opportunity for me to come and chat with your clients this evening on 1031 Exchange. Get this all fired up here. Perfect. Can you see my screen okay?
Yep.
Excellent. So, first of all, I just want to thank you, Eric, because it's not the vast majority. I've been doing this for 28 years, by the way, everybody. I'm Russell Marsan, Senior Vice President with Investment Property Exchange Services. We're the largest qualified intermediary in the nation. That's all we do is 1031s. I've been facilitating for 28 years now. And most of the educational presentations I give are to commercial brokers, realtors, CPAs, and attorneys. It's not that often that I actually get to speak and educate to the clients directly, the investors. And I love it. It's my favorite one to do. It's because it takes not that many agents actually take the time and the energy to educate their clients in this manner. So I just want to give you kudos, Eric, for doing that for your clients. It's a great thing. So as I said, I'm Russell Marsan, Senior Vice President with Investment Property Exchange Services. We're only together today. Normally this would take probably about an hour and a half, but tonight probably about an hour, I would guess. Because the online ones are typically a little faster pace and less questions, less interactive because we're not live with one another. But I do encourage all of you online to go ahead and feel free. This is a small, intimate crowd. So let's personalize this. If you have a question as I'm speaking, feel free to unmute yourself and just go ahead and interrupt me and say, hey, I've got a question about that. You can also type something into the chat box and Eric will be monitoring that. Either way is fine, but you don't have to save your questions till the end. We can go along and answer them as we go. I'm a visual person. A lot of times if I'm learning something from somebody speaking, if I have a question, I can't kind of follow along if I don't have that question answered and visualized in my mind. So feel free to do so. So we're only together tonight for about an hour, hour and a half tops. Let me be very clear. You don't need to remember anything I say. The only thing you need to remember tonight is this: my contact information. That's my contact information. You can call me anytime you have any questions. That is my cell phone number on there. So if you call me at like 9 o'clock on a Friday night, the first thing you don't have to say is, Russell, I'm so sorry for bugging you at 9 o'clock on a Friday night. I'm a financial tax nerd. So by default, I don't have a life. You'll be giving me a life by simply calling me and asking me tax questions. That's all good. I teach accredited courses for CPAs and attorneys. So I'm a free resource for your tax and legal advisors as well. So you can call anytime, but let's talk 1031. So first of all, what is a 1031? The 1031 is the greatest wealth building tool in the entire Internal Revenue Code because it allows real estate investors to buy and sell real estate throughout the course of their entire life without having to pay any taxes. As we grow in life, our financial objectives change, right? Early on, maybe you're trying to build wealth. So you're going to you own real estate that are primarily designed for appreciation, growth, right? Later on in life, maybe you have multiple rental properties or just any type of real estate. Well, now you have a bunch of equity. Now it's time to retire. So now I'm not interested in appreciation because I've built a lot of wealth, a lot of equity. So now I'm focused on preservation of capital, right? I don't want to lose equity. And I want to maximize my monthly income, my cash flow. So now I want to pivot to another type of real estate. And then there's the third one. That's kind of one of the three major financial objectives. And that is passive. Right? When you're tired of the headaches of real estate. Okay, well, there's different types of real estate that suit all those different financial objectives. So as you grow in life and your objectives change, the 1031 allows you to pivot. right? And go from the property that is no longer meeting your objectives to another one. So you can continue to, move your portfolio forward and it's meeting your financial objectives. But 1031 is actually very underused section code too, because there's so many misconceptions about the 1031 out there. They think it's very limited. They think, oh, you can only do these few little things with a 1031. And the reality is the 1031 is almost unlimited with its growth potential in maximizing all of your investment properties. So, but I do get this a lot, and I'll ask a client, hey, you're going to be doing a 1031 exchange. And they'll say something like, nope, I'm not going to do an exchange because I've already calculated the tax in my own mind, and it's not going to be that much. There's two big red flags in that statement. One is I calculated the tax in my own mind, right? If you're to say, what's that? That's somebody had a question there. So if you're to say, no, I talked to my CPA, he said I don't have any capital gains, or I talked to Russell and I don't need to do an exchange. Great. But a lot of people just buy and hold real estate. I work with a lot of clients that have owned properties for 20 or 30 years, and they're just selling for the first time now. Well, if you haven't sold real estate in 20 years, you're not familiar with taxation, probably. And a lot of people think, well, I'm just going to pay 15%, right? And physically impossible. It is physically impossible for any investor anywhere in the United States to sell an investment property and only pay 15% in tax, even if you live in a state that doesn't have state tax, which California is not one of those states. Here's the actual tax rates. And here's kind of a breakdown of how taxation works in real estate. So there's what's called capital gains tax. Kind of everybody's heard of that. Capital gains tax is a tax on the appreciation of an asset. Right? So you bought a property for $200,000, you sold it for $500,000. It appreciated by $300,000. That's profit, right? That's taxable gain. That's taxed by the federal government at a rate of 15 to 20%, the long-term capital gains. The state doesn't have a capital gains tax rate. It's just taxed as ordinary income. And that's based on whatever your adjusted gross income is. The uppermost bracket of California is 13.3%. So let's say it's 10% for you. So that's if you combine the feds and the state, that's between 25 to 30% just in capital gains. There's a second tax. I call it the hidden tax because typically people are not familiar with this tax unless they've actually been hit by it sometime in their life. And that's recapture of depreciation. Now, everybody that owns investment real estate is familiar with the term depreciation because it's one of the major benefits in owning improved real estate, like a rental property or an apartment complex, something like that. You get to take the value of the structures or improvements, and you get to take that value and divide it by 27 and a half years. So if I buy, I don't know, $550,000 rental house, the depreciation schedule on that is probably going to be around $15,000 a year. So every year for 27 and a half years, I get to take $15,000 of depreciation, which means the first $15,000 of rent has an automatic write-off of $15,000 against it, which means the first $15,000 of rent is kind of tax-free to me. I don't have to pay income tax on it. So it's a wonderful benefit. But every year that I'm taking that depreciation, I'm actually lowering my cost basis by that amount. So if I'm taking $15,000 of depreciation per year, and I've owned the property for 10 years, I've taken $150,000 of depreciation. So if I bought it for $550,000, after 10 years, my basis is not $550,000, it's $400,000. Right? I've lowered my cost basis by that much. So when I sell the property, I bought it for $5,000, I sold it for $8,000. The $300,000 is taxed as capital gain. The $150,000 of depreciation I've taken is also taxed, but it's taxed at a much higher rate to the feds. They're going to charge me 25% flat rate, no matter what my income is on that. And then the state of California doesn't care if it's appreciation or depreciation. It's all just taxable income to the state. So they're going to charge their same 10 to 13%. So that's a minimum of 35% in tax. And then the last tax on top of that is what's called the net investment income tax, more commonly known as the affordable health care tax. And that one's 3.8%. So when you blend all of these taxes together, the average tax in California is more like 35%, right? It can be over 40% in taxes, in the highest tax bracket if you have a lot of gain. And also there's collateral damage to your tax picture, right? Because I have some people say, well, I'm on a fixed income. We only make $40,000 a year. We're a retired couple. And if you look on the charts for the government capital gains tax brackets, you see I pay no capital gains, so I can sell my property and pay no capital gains. That's not the way it works. You're selling a piece of real estate. The profit or gain from that asset is taxable income to you. It becomes part of your adjusted gross income for the year. So if you sell a property and you have $400,000 of taxable gain in that property, that's not how much tax you pay. That's the gain you have in it, right? The profit. Well, that's $400,000 that just got added to your income for the year. So yeah, you made $40,000 of ordinary income, but you also made $400,000. So you have now your tax bracket is going to be based on $440,000 of income, which means the $40,000 of income is taxed at a much higher rate also. So it has collateral damage. I've had retired couples be knocked out of Social Security for a year. Or out of Medicare for a year because they made too much money because of the gain from the sale of their asset. So the moral of that story is you just want to make sure if you're not doing an exchange, find out from your tax advisor what your actual tax hit's going to be, because you don't want to close, because after you close, it's too late, right? So you want to make sure you know that number up front. But let's just very quickly run through a little scenario, a math scenario, kind of showing the difference between selling with a 1031 exchange versus selling without a 1031 exchange. So let's say I am selling a property for $1 million. I've owned the property forever. I own it free and clear. I've fully depreciated the property. What I want, my primary financial objective in life is still appreciation. So what I want to do is sell this property. And with the proceeds from that, I want to buy 3 bigger and better properties. I'm going to leverage myself out because I'm going after appreciation. So the money, the proceeds that come out of the sale are going to be a 25% down payment on a 75% loan to value ratio that I acquire. So if I sell a property and I'm going to not do an exchange, so let's say in my example is 35%, I'm going to have to set aside 35% to pay my taxes. So, that's approximately, in rough numbers, $350,000. That's money I'm going to pay in tax. That's money that I just said goodbye to, right? That'll never earn another penny for me. It'll never grow and compound. If you compound that number out between now and the rest of my life, that might be $1 million. That won't be part of my portfolio or my estate because I paid my tax today. So that leaves me $650 to reinvest into my next properties. So with that as my 25% down payment, I can buy 2.6. So that's nice. I sold for $650. I bought for 2.6. Nice. Now let's do the same analogy with a 1031. So I sell for $1 million. If I'm doing a 1031, I don't have to set aside any money for taxes. So I get to reinvest the full proceeds, the full $1 million. With the same loan to value ratios, I can buy $4 million worth of real estate. Now, this is an extreme example, but no matter how large or small the transaction is, the math always works out. You're going to be moving a lot more money forward with you if you do the exchange. This is one example. Multiply this out over all of the buying and selling I will do over the course of my entire life, and you'll see how much larger my nest egg is when I go to retire from my real estate because I didn't pay my tax. Even with this information, some people still say, nope, I don't want to do an exchange, right? And I get this a lot, especially now. Because what will happen is their tax advisor, the CPA, will say, don't do an exchange. Capital gains are going to be going up in the future, right? And so if they're going to go up higher than they are now, why not just pay them now instead of later when it might be capital gains might be higher? Because all of us have been patterned to believe that 2 things in life are 100% absolutely inevitable, right? Right now in your mind, you're saying death and taxes. That is 100% false. We've been lied to. Only one of those things is actually inevitable. That's the death thing, of course. We do have the tax thing figured out. Taxes are not inevitable. Current estate tax law is incredibly favorable. If you are single and your estate is below $12.9 million, there's no estate tax. And your heirs get a step up in basis. If you're married, that number doubles, almost $26 million, no estate tax. Now, the step up in basis is the super cool part. Let's say I bought a property in Grass Valley 60 years ago for 100 grand. And let's say when I pass away, it's worth $2 million. Okay, if I would have sold it during my life, I would have paid taxes on $1.9 million of gain, right? That would have been a lot. Don't have to do that through the estate process if I held that property. Now, when I pass away, let's say I pass away yesterday, which makes this evening presentation kind of awkward. I pass away yesterday. My kids go on title to the property today, right? They can turn around and call Eric and say, hey, Eric, I want you to sell Pop's old property. I don't want it, right? They don't need to do a 1031 exchange. They have zero tax consequence because they got a step on basis. So their basis in the property is $2 million. Well, that's what they're selling the property for, is $2 million. There's no profit or gain there, right? It's as if they bought it yesterday and they're selling it today. So all of the estate taxes, all of the taxes are wiped out through the estate process. So that's why we say, don't cash out of your real estate and pay your tax. Instead, just exchange into something else that better suits your current financial objectives. Because as those financial objectives change, I promise you, there's some type of real estate that'll suit those objectives. So don't cash out. Instead, exchange until you die. We call it swap until you drop. Very cool. It should be a bumper sticker. As you grow in life, your objectives change. So just reposition that money into different types of objectives and don't give up that tax money while you're alive. And then your heirs can inherit the property and do whatever they want with it, right? When they sell the property after you pass, they don't have to buy other real estate. They can do whatever they want with that money. Does anybody have any questions on taxation or anything before, or the estate tax before I move on?
No.
Okay, excellent. Well, then we will move on to some fun stuff. We'll talk about the basic rules of 1031. So there are rules to a 1031. There's time frames involved in a 1031 exchange, right? You have 45 days to identify and 180 days to close. Both of those time frames begin at the close of escrow of the property being sold, the relinquished property. Once those time periods have started, they can't be stopped. Right. And they're calendar days, they're not business days. So if one of those deadlines falls on a weekend or a holiday or my birthday, which should be a holiday, then you don't get the next business day. It's still that day. So it's very important to know that. Because a lot of people think, well, April 15th, if it falls on a weekend or a holiday, you get the next business day. You don't in the 1031 exchange. And the 45-day identification period is the number one killer of 1031s, right? Because some people wait until the relinquished property is actually closed to begin the process of writing offers on replacement properties and looking. That's a bad strategy, right? Preferably, you should be in contract on a replacement property prior to closing on the relinquished property. And the reason why I say that is because in a perfect world, you should try to complete your exchange before day 45 passes. And the reason for that is because prior to midnight on day 45, you can change your identification all you want. You can add and revoke to your heart's content. But as soon as midnight strikes on the 45th day, you are set in stone on only buying something you've identified. You can't substitute new properties after day 45. And that's when it becomes risky. Right? Because if the one property you have your heart set on is under contract and it's day 48, right? And you named two backup properties, well, you get the termite report. And that says basically there's no wood in this property. It's just a million termites holding it up. So you don't want the property anymore, right? So you fall out of escrow on that one. And then you go to write offers on your two backup properties, but they've already been bought by somebody else. They're not available anymore. You're out. Your exchange is going to fail. right? So try to complete your exchange before day 45, or if it's going to go past day 45, then make sure you're rock solid in the property you're in contract on, and for sure it's going to close, because you don't want to take the risk. So get into contract early on the replacement property whenever possible. And there's 3 rules of identification you see here on this screen. All of these rules were created to allow an exchanger to identify more properties than they actually want to buy. So that way they potentially have backup properties. The 3 property rules, the first one you see there, it's the most common rule. And that's used when people are buying 1 or 2 replacement properties. Most exchangers fall under that. Most exchangers are only buying 1 or 2 properties. So the 3 property rule works because it gives you 1 or 2 backup properties. Some people, though, go into an exchange knowing we're going to buy 5 or 6 properties or more. Okay, well, 3 property rule doesn't work. So then you have to use the 200% rule. The 200% rule is the second most common rule. And that one, there's no cap to the number of properties. So you can identify 10, 20, 100 properties, but there is a cap to the value. So the value of everything you identify can't exceed 200% of the value of the real estate you sold. You sold a $2 million piece of real estate, you can identify $4 million worth of replacement properties, no matter how many properties that consists of. Right? That could be $40,000, $100,000 properties. One of those 2 rules will fit for everybody. There is a third rule. I'll tell it to you, but I want you to forget it because you're never going to use it. I've seen in my 28 years in doing this, I've literally only seen it used twice. And it was the same kind of scenario. The 95% exception rule is basically for somebody who violates the other 2 rules. So you identified 6 properties. Okay, well, you can't use the 3 property rule. And those 6 properties were worth 400% of what you sold for. 200% rule doesn't work. So in that case, you have to default to the 95% exception rule, which states that you have to close on 95% of what you've identified, which is like everything. I don't know why they didn't call it the 100% rule. I don't get the 5% thing. So if you identify 10 properties, guess how many properties you have to close on? 10. If you close on 9, your exchange fails. The entire exchange, not even a partial exchange. The 2 times I've seen it used is when clients were buying an entire portfolio of real estate from one seller. And they were either going to buy the whole portfolio or nothing. And the number of properties and value exceeded both the other 2 rules. So it's like a catch-all, right? Don't worry about those identification rules, because when you get involved in an exchange with me, I'm going to help you to determine in that exchange which rule you should use. So you don't need to worry about it now. And then you've got the total of the 180 days to actually close escrow. Those are concurrent time frames, right? They run together. So after day 45, you only have 135 left. Like I said, there's no extensions for the holidays, weekends, things like that. Although there are extensions, but they're super limited. The only extensions you ever get are for if you're impacted by a federally declared disaster. Unfortunately, we've seen our share of those in California and continue to do so. So anytime there is a large forest fire, floods, earthquakes, hurricanes, COVID, 9/11, these are examples of federally declared disasters that issue extensions. So if you're impacted by that, which means you live in the area. Now, if you remember the last year, we had this massive flooding throughout California early on in the year. Well, that created a 120-day extension for almost the entire state. Literally, there's, I think, 58 counties in the state of California. 52 of them were under this notice. So literally 97% of the population of California 2 years ago, or last year, actually was allowed a 120-day extension on their exchange. So, but you have to live in one of those areas that's named. So if your county that you live in is named in that, doesn't mean you lost a property or had to evacuate. It just means that you live in the county that was named in the notice. Then you get the 120-day extension for it. So if you need more time for your exchange, the only way is like create a federally declared disaster somehow. If you do, got to warn you, you're probably going to go to jail, but you're going to save some money in taxes. So those are the time frames involved in a 1031 exchange. Now, there's also equal or greater value. This is also this is the math of the 1031, right? Like, because get asked this question every day, Russell, I'm selling for this. How much do I have to buy for? Okay, well, actually, three things have to be equal or greater in a 1031 exchange if you don't want to pay any tax, right? You can buy down in value. I can sell a property for $1 million and buy something for $800,000 and have a valid exchange. I'm going to pay tax on wherever that difference is. So if I buy down in value by 200,000, I'm going to pay tax on 200,000. I'll defer the rest in the 1031 exchange. So it's what we call a partial exchange, right? Perfectly fine to do, not a problem. But if you don't want to pay any tax, three things have to be equal or greater. First thing is sales price. So how much are you selling for? I'm selling for 900,000. Great. You don't have to technically buy for 900,000. You do get to make some subtractions to bring you down to a net equal or greater price. What you get to subtract are those one-time non-recurring closing costs, realtor commissions, title and escrow fees, transfer tax, those kinds of one-time traditional costs get subtracted. So if you sell for 900,000, those costs were 50,000. 850 is your equal or greater mark to defer all tax. Second thing that has to be equal or greater is all the proceeds. So that means all of the cash that comes out of the closing of the property you're selling, after maybe a mortgage was paid off, after, commissions, everything else, closing costs were paid, then whatever those proceeds are left over, that all has to be reinvested. That has to be the down payment for whatever replacement properties you buy. Any cash you touch yourself that comes to you directly is going to be taxable. And the third thing that has to be equal or greater is debt. That one, just from a math standpoint, kind of makes sense, right? Because if I'm selling a property for $500,000 and let's say I have a $300,000 mortgage on it. Well, when I sell it and do the exchange, the mortgage is going to be paid off. So that means there's only going to be $200,000 of proceeds that come into my exchange account. Well, you have to buy for $500,000 again to be equal or greater. So how am I going to buy something for $500,000 with only $200,000 of liquid cash? I'm typically going to take out a loan, right, to make up that difference. Of course, there's always exceptions to rules, and there's certainly one to this, and that is you can replace debt with outside cash. Right, so in the same scenario, sold for $500,000, $300,000 loan was paid off at closing. They found their $500,000 replacement property. The $200,000 from the exchange account is going to go in as a down payment, but it just so happens the exchanger has $300,000 of liquid cash accessible somewhere. So they're going to buy their equal or greater $500,000 replacement property with all cash. Perfectly fine. Won't pay any tax. You don't have to replace debt if you have outside cash. And so really, if two things happen, you never pay tax in an exchange. You defer all tax. One, buy and sell for equal or greater value. Two, don't touch any money, right? Those two things happen. All of these equal or greater things just naturally falls into place. The math all naturally falls into place. So that is equal or greater. So same thing. Any questions on timeframes or equal or greater as we move past it? Hearing none. Excellent. Now we'll talk about a fun one, like kind. Right? This is the greatest misconception in all of 1031, is this whole like kind terminology. Now, I get this all the time. I'll have clients say, well, I'm selling a piece of land, and I heard my tax advisor told me I can only buy land because that's like kind, right? Or if I'm selling a rental house, I can only buy a rental house or commercial for commercial because it has to be like kind. Yeah, that's incorrect. Like kind is not what a property looks like. Like kind is how a property is treated. Any property that's treated for business or investment purposes is like kind. That's huge, right? Let's say I own a piece of land. Let's say I inherited 5 acres in Grass Valley, and I've had it for 10, 15 years. Well, what's that property worth now? I'm just going to pick a number. Let's say it's worth $500,000. Um, that's $500,000 of what we call in the financial world stagnant equity, because it's just 5 acres of hills. You're not farming it, you're not ranching it, so there's no income being produced off it. No depreciation can be taken because there's no improvements on it. So it's literally a negative cash flow vehicle, right? You're paying your property taxes on it every year, you're maintaining it, and you hope it goes up in value. You can do a 1031 exchange from raw land into improved property. You can buy rentals, you can buy a rental house, you can buy fourplex, you can buy apartment complexes, you can buy mini storage, commercial, industrial. It's all like kind. That's huge. So you can take $500,000 of stagnant equity in the land you own and buy a rental house. Right? Now you have rental income coming in every month off your equity. Now you have depreciation to help shelter the taxable income on that income from that asset. And in a lot of cases, you're going to have a better appreciating asset in the long run. You can do that entire transaction free, right? Most people don't know this. I can't count the number of times tax advisors have told my clients, you can't exchange raw land for improved property. It's not like kind. That's 100% false, right? And that misconception has been out there for years, and it's still floating out there. All of these asset classes you see on this slide are all like kind. And for the most part, they kind of all have different financial objectives. And that's the beauty of the 1031, and why this like kind makes 1031 such a powerful wealth building tool, because these asset classes have different types of financial objectives. As your objectives change, the 1031 allows you to pivot to that type of real estate that better suits your current financial objectives. So if it's all like kind, why even have that classification? Why even say like kind if it's everything? And that's because there are actually some things that are not like kind. All of the things you see on this slide are not like kind and not exchangeable. Partnership interest in the upper left-hand corner, not exchangeable. A partnership can do an exchange. Any tax-paying entity can do a 1031 exchange. It's just that the taxpayer that sells has to be the same taxpayer that buys. So I can't sell as a 3-member LLC and buy as an individual. So if any of you out there are in partnerships where you're like in multiple member LLCs and you're thinking about going your separate ways, you need to call me, right? So we can talk about that and plan it for you. So you execute it. And so you can actually do an exchange and go your separate ways. Inventory properties don't qualify 1031, stocks, bonds, no types of securities. I actually have that picture. You're probably wondering, why is there a saber-tooth tiger skull picture there? We used to be able to do 1031 exchanges on a lot of different things besides real estate. Real estate was just one asset class that you could 1031. But the Jobs Act changed things back in 2017. We used to be able to exchange anything you held for business or investment purposes. So tractors, boats, planes, fleets of vehicles, livestock, arts and collectibles. This saber-tooth tiger skull is actually from a client of mine in the past. It's one of my most memorable phone calls. I had a client call me once and said, hey, I need to do I want to do a 1031 exchange on my saber-tooth tiger skull. And she had owned it for many years. And she wanted to exchange it for a larger fossil, like a mammoth. And she asked me, she said, are they like kind? And I said, well, the IRS didn't really have foresight to come up with that specific of, what is like kind. So I said, I believe it's like kind, but it's your tax advisor that has to actually tell you yes or no and give you the green light. So I proposed, hey, get your tax advisor on the line. We'll have a 3-way conference call and I'll explain to your tax advisor why it should be like kind to help her render a decision for you. So we did that, and the tax advisor's on the line, and I'm going through my spiel on why I believe it's like kind. And about like 5 minutes into the conversation, the client's CPA chimes in and just shuts me down. She's like, Russell, I think we need to stop this conversation right now. And she's angry. And I said, why? What's the problem? She goes, I think you're putting my client in danger. Like, whoa, what do you mean? And she goes, I am quite certain, this is her words, I am quite certain that the saber-toothed tiger is on the endangered species list. Yeah, I was like, no, It's on the other list. It's on the extinct list. I think the EPA checked that box like 10,000 years ago. So even though I didn't say it to the client, I thought in my mind, you need a new CPA. But so she did the exchange and it was all good. But now the only thing you can exchange now is just real estate, only real estate, which is fine because that's what we're talking about here. But there's one here on the screen that I've got circled there in red at the bottom, the primary residence. So primary residence, that's real estate, but it's personal use real estate. So in order to qualify for 1031, your intent must be to hold for business or investment purposes, not personal use or not inventory. And that's fine, right? Because if you're selling a primary residence, in most cases, you're not going to pay any taxes anyway, because you already have a wonderful tax benefit. It's called Section 121 of the Internal Revenue Code. And that's that primary residence exclusion that came into play back in 97, where if you've owned and occupied your primary for any 2 out of the last 5 years, if you're single, you get to exclude $250,000 of the profit or the gain, right? If you're married, you get to exclude $500,000 of the gain. And you can take that exclusion, by the way, every 2 years. It's not a once in a lifetime exclusion anymore. Right? You can literally sell a primary residence every 2 years and pay no tax. So because of that wonderful Section 121, nobody would want to do an exchange anyway on a primary residence. But a lot of people would like to use the 1031 to buy a primary residence. Common retirement strategy. So let's say that you want to sell a couple investment properties, a couple rental properties or a piece of land that you own, and you'd like to use that cash to buy your very expensive home up in Tahoe or Bodega Bay or somewhere, right? Well, it's face value. I can't do it because of personal use property. But what I can do is go through a conversion process. So when I buy the property, I have to buy it as an investment property. The IRS created my absolute favorite revenue procedure back in 2008. This is a safe harbor. They don't title a lot of revenue procedures safe harbor, because if what a safe harbor means is if you follow whatever that recipe is, you are safe from the IRS. They can't challenge you, which is rare, right? They normally like us to live in fear. And so that's why this is an actual recipe. It's a gift from them saying, hey, here's how you can use a 1031 to buy your dream home that you want to use for personal use. And that's why it's my favorite revenue procedure. I actually read this revenue procedure every night before I go to bed. It gives me very happy dreams. So here is the actual revenue procedure. Here's how it works. So let's say you sell your investment properties. You would have been killed in taxes if you just sold them outright, because you've owned them forever. You have a very low basis in them. You don't have to pay any taxes. So when you sell them, you get to take 100% of those proceeds and buy your very expensive property all cash. For the first 2 years, and this is the time period, for the first 2 years, you have to treat the property 2 ways. One is you have to limit your personal use to 2 weeks a year or less, or 10% of the rental history per year, whichever is a bigger number, right? So if you're renting that property out on like VRBO for 300 days a year, well, you could use it personally for 30 days a year. Now remember, a personal use visit is you're just going there and hanging out, right? If you're going there for a maintenance visit to work on the property, that's not a personal use, that's a maintenance visit, right? So you can do maintenance to the property above the 2 weeks a year, right? Obviously run it by your CPA. So there's ways to use the property for more than 2 weeks a year legally within the tax code. But nevertheless, that's the first thing I have to do, is limit my personal use. The second thing I have to do is show income on it. But that's a crazy low standard. I only have to show 2 weeks per year of income on it. That's it. That's crazy. Wait a minute, you mean I can sell investment properties? I would have been killed in taxes. I can take all that money, buy my dream home. All I have to do for the first 2 years is limit my personal use and then just find a friend to rent it to for 2 weeks a year. Yep, that's all you got to do. You don't have to offer it on VRBO or Airbnb or offer it for lease. You just have to show 2 weeks of income on it for each of the first 2 years. I mean, most people, I'm saying this, I'm really kind of highlighting that minimal use because we're talking about a dream home scenario, right? And if you want to buy your dream home, typically what's the last thing you want in your dream home? Full-time tenants, right? So this is a way you can use a 1031 exchange to convert investment properties into your dream home. So, I always ask people, are you thinking about retiring over the next 2 years and moving somewhere else and buying another primary residence in the next 2 years? Or have you thought about buying a second home or vacation home anywhere in the United States? I think the answer is yes to that. You own these investment properties now. You can do that with a 1031 exchange now. You can accomplish those goals now because of this revenue procedure, this safe harbor. After 2 years, you can do whatever you want with this property. You can move into it as a primary. You could treat it as a pure second home or vacation home. You never have to rent it again, ever, after 2 years. And your exchange is 100% safe harbor. Can't be overturned or challenged by the IRS. That's huge. That's huge. It's a wonderful thing. It's a wonderful gift they gave us back in 2008. So any questions on the conversion of a primary residence or anything like that? Is anybody still awake? Yes. Okay, cool.
Yes.
Yes, you're awake, or yes, you have a question?
Yes, I'm awake, and that's an interesting rule.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, I was really surprised. We knew 6 months before that revenue procedure came out that it was coming out, because that was an area of controversy forever, because people would use a 1031 exchange and then they would want to move into it very soon. So, and there was a lot of challenges, right? So the IRS finally came out with that revenue procedure. So when they told us we're coming out with it, I thought that there was going to be a minimum of like a 6 month per year rental history on it each year. When they came out with the 2 weeks a year, I was shocked. It's like, wow, that's crazy low standard. The person that wrote that revenue procedure was probably really nice, and I'm quite certain that they've been fired by the IRS since then, because nice people can't work for the IRS. But man, that was just a wonderful gift that we were given from that. I haven't seen a revenue procedure like that before or since. Now I want to talk about mixed use exchanges. So this is also along the lines of a primary residence. So what I ask people is, okay, well, do you have any business use? If you're selling a primary residence, do you have any business use in that property? And they'll ask, well, what do you mean? Well, do you claim an in-home office? Do you rent out a bedroom to traveling nurses on Airbnb? What do you do with the ADU in the backyard? So if you do mixed use exchange is where it's one property, right? But it has multiple uses to the owner. They live there, so part of it's personal use, but they also have a business use in the property too. So it's mixed use. The most common example and the easy one from a math standpoint is like the picture you see on the screen, a duplex. So let's say I live in half and I rent out the other half. Well, if I own it and live in it for at least 2 years, and then I sell it, half the sales price will come to me completely tax-free because I'm using my Section 121 homeowners exclusion, right? The other half of the sales price, well, that's my equal or greater threshold I need to buy investment properties for. So if I sell this duplex for $1 million, $500,000 comes to me tax-free. $500,000 is what I have to reinvest in like-kind replacement properties to satisfy my exchange. So I eliminated some tax and I deferred the rest. The net effect was I paid no tax when I sold the property. So a duplex is a common one. Other ones like in-home office, right? Because a duplex, if it's same square footage, that's easy to figure out how much you allocate towards 1031 and how much you allocate towards 121. Well, what about if I have an in-home office or if I rent out a bedroom? How do I figure out that? It's actually pretty easy because you're taking depreciation. Depreciation is based on square footage. So if you have an in-home office, maybe the bedroom that you use is 15% of the total square footage of the house. So therefore you're taking 15% depreciation on the asset. So you'd want to mirror your 1031 allocations to mirror your tax reporting, right? So 15% of the sales price would need to flow through a 1031. 85% of the sales price would come to you tax-free under Section 121. And it's funny because, if somebody says, because if somebody says, yeah, I have an in-home office, I'm like, okay, well, have you talked to your CPA right? Have you asked them how much you're going to pay in taxes if you don't do an exchange? They're like, well, I'm not going to pay any taxes. It's my primary residence. And I don't have more than $500,000 of gain and I'm married. So I'm not going to pay any taxes. You're going to pay taxes. If you have a business use on your property, if you take depreciation, when you sell a primary residence, right? That section 121 exclusion, it's an exclusion of gain. Gain, if you remember, we talked about at the beginning, is based on the appreciation of an asset. Section 121 is not an exclusion of the recapture of depreciation. So when you sell a primary, if you've taken any depreciation, you are 100% going to be taxed on that depreciation unless you do a partial exchange with a mixed use. So if this is a scenario where, and you're selling a primary residence and you do have a mixed use, talk to your CPA. Right? If your CPA says you're going to pay $2,000 in taxes, okay, well, don't do an exchange, just pay your tax. If the CPA comes back and says you're going to pay $60,000 in taxes, okay, well, now you have the option to do a 1031, right? So now you at least have the choice. The moral of the story also, like we talked about earlier, is don't sell and close your property until you know what your tax hit's going to be, right? Because much better to make a decision on knowing what that tax hit's going to be, so that way you know your options and you exercise them. Now, ADUs have become popular. Of course, we used to call ADUs the mother-in-law units. Oh, sorry, that's a typo there. Same thing, the mother-in-law unit in the backyard, right? that is the mother-in-law unit in the backyard, the ADU. Same thing. What's the square footage of that versus the square footage of the entire property? That needs to flow through a 1031 exchange if you're renting it. Otherwise, it's going to be taxable. Now, here's an interesting one: a primary residence on acreage. So let's say I bought a property 60 years ago outside of Grass Valley, and it was 100 acres. Just rolling hills, never ranched it, never farmed it. Well, I bought it for $100,000 60 years ago. Now that property is subdividable. It's right near a golf course. So that property now may be worth $5 million. Just picking a number. Well, I bought it for $100,000. I'm selling it for $5 million. It's my primary residence. The entire property is my primary residence. It's one parcel. But my primary residence, that section 121 exclusion, not very good to me, right? Because my basis I get back tax-free, that was the $100,000. Well, I get my $500,000 of gain tax-free, right? So that's cool. But that means only $600,000 I get back tax-free. I'm selling for $5 million. So what is that? $4.4 million fully taxable to me. Ouch. That's going to equate to probably close to $2 million in taxes that I'd actually pay, because I'd be in the uppermost tax bracket. I can do an exchange on that property. Now, like before, we talked about we got to move out of the property or something and convert it to 1031. This, you don't have to move out, right? This is that acreage qualifies. And here's the concept: like, it's 100 acres with a house. What do you really use for personal use? That's the house and like the acre around it. The 99 acres I held for appreciation, which is investment, which qualifies 1031 as like kind. So that's where Eric would assist, right? When you're listing the property and it's going into contract, you got a $5 million contract. Okay, now we need to figure out allocations. So it's going to be Eric, me, and your tax advisor, right? Eric's going to be the tip of the spear. He's going to do 2 market analysis for you. One is going to be, if the house were just on 1 acre, what would it sell for? Maybe his comps show $1 million. Okay. How about the 99 acres? If that were just to stand alone as subdividable land, what would that go for? Maybe his comps show $4 million. Okay. Now you've got your allocations. This is voluntary on the seller's part, but they should be defensible should they be called into question, right? So at closing, I'm the seller, I'm going to instruct escrow, send me $1 million at closing. That's going to go towards my primary residence exclusion. I'll still probably pay a little bit of tax because I'm above my $500,000 of gain even on the $1 million. But on the other $4 million, I'm going to put that into a 1031 exchange. I'm going to reinvest that into income properties. That's going to provide me income on $4 million for the rest of my life. So instead of giving up almost $2 million in taxes, I pocketed $600,000 tax-free, paid a little bit of tax on some excess, and then took $4 million and provided cash flow for the rest of my life to provide me with a nice retirement. Didn't have to pay a dime in taxes on that end, all through a mixed use exchange. And if I had ranched or farmed the acreage, okay, it's a no-brainer that it qualifies 1031. But my example is I never ranched it, I never farmed it. It was just rolling hills, it was just acreage. Never had any kind of business use on it. It still qualifies 1031, even though it wasn't technically what you consider business use. You held the land for appreciation. That's investment that qualifies 1031. So the moral of that story is, if any of you ever sell a primary residence and you're in excess of your $250,000 or $500,000 of gain, what are you going to do? The answer is you're going to call me, right? And when can you call me? Anytime. It's wonderful. So yeah, any questions on the mixed use exchange or primary residence? Move past it. Nope.
No.
Another type of property that is not like kind is inventory property or dealer properties, right? Personal use property is not like kind, not exchangeable. Dealer inventory also. What I mean by inventory dealer properties, if your intent while you own a property is to resell it every day you own it, it's inventory property. So a builder, they buy land, develop it, subdivide it, build spec homes, sell them. Inventory property doesn't qualify 1031. Flipped properties don't qualify 1031 because your intent is to resell them no matter how long it takes. So sometimes though, flippers will ask, I'll run into this question. They'll say, hey, somebody told me about a 1031. Like, give me the scoop. Can I use a 1031 on my flips? And there's only one question I ask them in return, and that is this: Mr. and Mrs. Flipper, do you need the money from your flips to live on? Right? The answer is yes. That's how we pay our bills. That's what we do for a living. Okay. Don't even think 1031. Just, you're going to pay ordinary income tax on the income, just like the rest of us do on our income. Don't even think 1031. Just flip and pay your tax. Some people say, no, I don't need any. We don't need the money to live on. We do something else for a living. I'm a policeman, I'm a teacher, right? This is a side hustle for them. What they would like to do is roll 100% of the equity into the next flip. Okay, well then you need to think about 1031, but that means you got to alter your strategy. So instead of buying, fixing up, and selling, you need to buy, fix up, and rent. You need to establish that held for intent. Right. And there is no stated time period that says, hey, this is how long you have to hold a property. Most tax advisors agree 1 year seems to be safe. So buy it, fix it up, get some rental history into it, own it in total for at least 1 full year, and you'll probably be fine. Now, a flipper, if they engage in that strategy, would do less flips because most flippers don't want to hold for a year. They want to flip as soon as possible. So you would engage in less flipping. But you would amass so much more wealth, so much more equity. Right? Because if a flipper or a builder sells a piece of real estate, they don't even get capital gains treatment. It's just taxed as ordinary income. So they're giving up between 30 and 40% every time they sell. If you slow it down and do less flips, you're going to keep that 30 to 40% rolling with you. No right or wrong either way. It's just options, right? Just about knowing your options. Now, let's talk about some reasons to 1031. 1031 is federal. So you can cross any state line with a 1031. I don't know, you guys have probably not heard this, but California is having something called an exodus. Yeah, everybody's heard that. I've certainly seen it for about 9 years in my industry. But what I see is a lot of people are just leaving the state personally. What I mean by that is they're selling their primary residence in California and they're moving to Alabama and they're buying a primary residence there. So I ask them, why? You still investment properties here. Why is that? Right? Why are you managing from 2,500 miles away? So you can relocate. You can relocate all of your investment properties into any state. So no matter what your reason is, if you're thinking of, buying and selling in other states, the 1031 is federal. And keep in mind that in this transaction, like selling in California and buying in Alabama, like you can sell one property in California and you can buy like half of Alabama. You can buy like that whole Bama part of the state. Very cool. So if you're thinking about buying a second home or vacation homes anywhere in the United States, or if you're thinking of, retiring to another state, you can do all that planning with a 1031 exchange. California does recognize the 1031 exchange, just like every state does. So you can sell in California and buy anywhere else. You will defer federal and state tax, and of course, vice versa. So very cool about that. Also, estate planning. So 1031 is a very powerful estate planning tool. The gentleman that came into my office, it was, gosh, a while ago, 20 years ago now, but he came into his office. He was 99 years old. You might wonder, how do I know that? I know that because that was the first thing he said when he talked to me. He said, Russell, I'm 99 years old. And of course, I thought to myself, like, I don't announce my age when I go into public buildings and meet strangers, but I guess I will if I get to be 99. I'll walk around saying, I'm 99, dadgummit. But he said he had an issue, right? He owned one very expensive piece of real estate. And he had 3 kids, and he's trying to plan his estate. Well, if 3 kids are going to inherit one piece of real estate, there's going to be some fighting going on, right? So 1031, right? So dad's going to sell the one investment property, and then he's going to go to each state where now all the kids live. They're 75. He calls them kids. He goes to each state now where they all live and says, okay, child number 1, what property would you like? He says, oh, I've had buying this one, Pops. Great. So dad goes to 3 separate states, buys 3 separate properties near each child for roughly 1/3 the value, right, of what he sold for. Has each child manage that property for him, pays him a management fee to do so, right? Sets each one of the properties up in a revocable living trust. So when the inevitable happens, there's no fighting, right? Because now each child is getting their property. They got the step up in basis, each child did. They can immediately sell the property and pay no tax if they want, or they can keep it if they like the property. They don't have to ask permission of the other siblings, right? So 1031 is a very powerful estate planning tool as well, to reposition your assets, to better whatever your estate plan is. Now, diversification. This is the #1 strategy in a 1031 exchange. And this is where you're using the 1031 exchange to build wealth, right? You're selling one property that you have a lot of equity in. And then you're going to use that equity to buy one property that's bigger and better, or 2 properties. You're going to grow your portfolio. And by the way, if you or somebody you know is not investing in real estate, they should. Right? Building wealth through real estate is one of the greatest paths to wealth building, is owning real estate. It doesn't have to be all your investment portfolio. I mean, still have an IRA, 401k, et cetera. But man, you need to invest in real estate, because if you're not in the real estate game, you can't play the real estate game, right? Because it'll be, if I buy a property today, and some people say, well, gosh, I'm not gonna, I've got a plan to buy my first rental property. I'm gonna set aside money every month, and 2 years from now, I'm gonna buy my first rental property. That's kind of a bad plan for a couple reasons. One is because just the premise of saving money every month is tough, right? Because life happens. And so, but let's say you do save some money every month. In 2 years from now, you're gonna buy your first piece of real estate. What could happen between now and 2 years? A lot, right? You could miss an appreciation cycle, because in an appreciation cycle, it's not possible to save per month as much money as real estate will be appreciating during that time period. Also, another thing is the unknown is interest rates, as we're seeing, right? We don't know where they're going to be. So I'm always a believer in the devil I know. Right? If you can afford to buy your first investment property now, then do so, right? Because if you're not in the game, you can't play the game. Because if you buy a property now, do whatever it takes, right? And then 2, 3, 4 years from now, you have some sweat equity in the property, maybe 50 grand of newfound equity. Now you can begin to play the game, right? Now you've got money that you're building to build your real estate portfolio. So this is this growth pattern of, using a 1031 exchange to build wealth. Well, when you get to the other end of that, let's say that I own 10 single family rental properties, right? So I bought one every couple of years. And now I own 10 single family rental properties, all free and clear. Okay, so really now it's time to do a consolidation exchange where I'm selling the 10 properties and buying one. Because I've owned single family rental properties for 30 years. I'm tired of that. I'm tired of the headaches of real estate. And now I want to retire from my active real estate. Well, if somebody is of retirement age and they own multiple single family rental properties, they're in the wrong asset class. I'm saying that from a financial planning standpoint, right? Because if you look at the different types of real estate, they all have different types of financial objectives. Single family type properties, the primary financial objective of single family is appreciation, not cash flow. Right? Cash flow is a consideration, but it's a secondary objective. It's not the primary objective for single family. If you want to build long-term wealth, phenomenal way to do it is buy and hold single family. Absolutely. You'll double and triple and quadruple your money over decades. Fantastic way to build it. But when you get to retirement age and you've built that wealth, okay, you shouldn't be investing in single family because you're in an asset that's primarily based for appreciation, not cash flow. Because now when you go to retire from real estate, typically you want more cash flow and you want preservation of capital. I don't want to lose my equity that I've built all these years. So really at that point, you need to kind of go to commercial. Commercial is designed for cash flow, right? Much better than residential is. And so that's primarily is cash flow. Secondarily is appreciation when you get into commercial. Now, the problem with that, and then by the way, the second objective along with cash flow is passive. Right? Because somebody gets to be a retirement age, especially if you managed your own rental properties for 30 years, man, you are tired of dealing. We call them the triple T's, right? Tenants, toilets, and trash. Right? We're tired of dealing with the triple T's. We just want passive cash flow. Right? So what some people will do, and I've seen this a lot over the years, they'll say, I'm just cashing out on my real estate. I'm going to pay my tax. I've really made a lot of money on my real estate over the years. So I'm just going to pay my tax and I'm going to put the money into some muni bond funds or money markets, right? And just go 100% passive. Okay. You're going to give up 35 to 40% of the income for the rest of your life because you paid that in taxes. So if you give up 35%, whatever you invest in has got to get a 35% rate of return just to break even, right? So there are things in real estate that you can invest in and still get that passive feel. So in the commercial realm, that's triple net lease. If you're not familiar with that term, a triple net lease means the tenants pay and do everything, right? They pay insurance, property taxes, any maintenance of the property. It's all paid by the tenant. You have zero responsibilities as an owner in a triple net lease scenario. But even that's kind of daunting, right? It's like, I don't know, I'm not familiar with buying my own Walgreens or something like that, or Rite Aid or something. I don't know anything about that. And that's where the DST comes into play, the Delaware Statutory Trust. Delaware Statutory Trust is the most passive form of real estate ownership. It was approved by the IRS back in 2004 as like-kind replacement property in a 1031 exchange. So we have over 20 years of history in our world with the DST. The DST was designed exactly for the scenario we're talking about. It was designed to suit the needs of someone that just wants to retire from active real estate. And that's the number one reason why people go into DSTs is because they just want passive income with no duties or responsibilities. Because when you buy into a DST, you're buying a fractional ownership interest in an institutional grade asset. That means it's an expensive asset. It's $100, $120, $150 million Class A asset somewhere. And it's 100% passive. So you literally have no duties or responsibilities. You'll get no phone calls and have to make no decisions. You also are not allowed any cash calls, which is actually the super cool part, because some people will say, I'm already passive in my rental properties because I have somebody else manage them for me. That's not really passive, right? Because what happens if the roof goes out? Who's cutting that check? The owner is. What happens if the hot water heater, the HVAC goes out? you're cutting the check. Not allowed in a DST. There's no cash calls allowed. So it is literally 100% passive. It's not for everybody, but there's really three reasons why people go into DSTs. The most common is they want to just retire from active real estate and earn passive cash flow every single month. The second reason, we've seen it used a lot since the pandemic, is in these low inventory real estate markets, people use the DST as like a 1031 bailout. Right? You had 45 days to find a replacement property. You wrote several offers. You lost out every time. You couldn't get into contract on something. So just before day 45, you're like, you know what? Let's just pluck our money into a DST. And when it sells 4 to 7 years from now, we'll go ahead and then come out and buy traditional real estate again, maybe, depending on what's going on in the market. The other reason why we see it used is as a sponge for a 1031. What I mean by that is you sold for $1.5 million. You bought traditional real estate for 1.3. You had $200,000 left in your exchange. I don't want to buy another piece of real estate. Okay, great. Pluck it into a DST so you don't have to pay taxes on the $200,000, right? Once again, it's not for everybody, but it is a great exit strategy from real estate, just to retire and go passive, or as a good 1031 bailout. Now, there's always questions on DSTs. Does anybody want to chime in with any questions at all?
Russell, I got a question for you.
Sure.
If I know that we discussed of when like if I pass away and I had all my money into a DST, what's that look like for my kids?
Oh, great question. So it's still real estate, right? You're investing in real estate. So let me be very clear. This is not a stock. This is not, you're not paid dividends or anything like that. This is real estate ownership. So you're receiving, lease income, right, from the manager of the asset every single month. And you still get to take the depreciation, right? So you have all the regular benefits you do of 1031 from tax purposes. I'm sorry, for real estate tax purposes. But so it's real estate. So it's treated the same. So what happens is, let's say you buy into a DST and you have 2 kids. And in your trust, you have designated your kids as your heirs, as beneficiaries, right? 50% each. So when you pass away, your kids would automatically go on title to the DST, 50% owners. So the manager of the asset would be sending 50% of the cash flow every month to one child, 50% to the other one, right? So they don't have to, it's not combined, they get their own stuff. They got the step up in basis. So when the property sells, let's say it sells 2 years later, your kids don't have to do an exchange, right? They're just going to receive the proceeds from that sale, and they can do whatever they want with the proceeds because they got that step up in basis. There's no taxable gain to them. So they don't have to buy other real estate with those proceeds. They can if they want to, but they don't have to. It's going to be tax-free money to them. Really good question. Any other questions on the DST or anything else that we've talked about?
No.
So the last thing I want to bring up is just our industry, right? It's a little known fact. We're what's called a qualified intermediary. Like I said, we're the largest in the nation. But believe it or not, we're in an unregulated industry, which is unfortunate. When you're engaged in an exchange, when you close on your relinquished property, those funds have to come to us. You can't have control of funds. So as the intermediary, being unregulated, legally, we can commingle funds. We can invest those funds into risky ventures to try to make money on your money while we're holding it, without any regulation. Over the last 25 years, over $1 billion with a B, $1 billion of exchange funds have been lost for various reasons: theft and embezzlement, non-safekeeping, bankruptcies, all kinds of stuff. So you do have to be really careful who you use, right? We're the largest in the nation. We're also a Fortune 500 company. Our parent company is Fidelity National Financial, largest title insurer in the world. They back us, and they make us put into place the highest level of safety and security in the entire industry. We voluntarily put into place, and this is all in writing, $100 million Fidelity bond, a $50 million performance guarantee, and $30 million of error and emissions. We're also very transparent. We want to make sure that we're not playing with your money while it's being held, that it's safe. So when your relinquished property closes, we create a segregated commercial bank account. and one of the 6 largest, most secure financial banks in the nation. We name you on that account also, so you know we're not playing with the money. You will actually earn the income, the interest income on the account, not us. Don't get excited about that, right? We're talking, this is the equivalent of a liquid checking account, right? So it's kind of that kind of basis points, but nevertheless, you know your money is safe and secure with us. You also have total access to myself anytime you have any questions. Does anybody else have any questions at this time?
No.
Russell,
Yeah.
I have another one if I may.
Sure.
If you have a like owner carry, because I had the other day somebody was asking me that, hey, I want to go ahead and sell my asset. And if I do owner carry on that, so they give them 20% down, they carry it for 10 years. Doesn't that then take every year? They only get so much money that they would have to pay capital gains on if they choose just to kind of cash out it that way. Of let's say 10 years, he gets a balloon payment. Does that kind of work that way a little bit on?
Yeah. So let's chat about that just a second. So whenever you do an installment sale, right? That is governed by another section code. It's section 453 of the Internal Revenue Code. And what the IRS does is you're a seller. And let's say that you're selling a piece of land and the buyer says, I have 100,000 as a down payment. I need you to carry a note for $400,000 for 10 years for me. So what the IRS is saying is that we'll allow you to use an installment sale. And so you're not receiving all of the proceeds in the year of sale. So the IRS is not going to tax you on all of the gain in the year of sale. So this installment sale treatment you get, once you close escrow on the property you're selling, now you're the beneficiary on that $400,000 note. You no longer own the real estate. You're just the beneficiary on the loan, on the $400,000. You're the bank. So as you receive principal payments each year, that's when you pay taxes on just that amount. So each year, whatever principal I'm receiving, I'll pay capital gains tax on that amount. So if it's amortized fully over 30 years, I pay a little bit each year. If it's interest only with a balloon in 5 years, I pay it all in the 5th year, right, with the balloon. So I eventually do pay full tax. It's just deferred over the life of the installment sale and however it's structured. If you want to do an exchange on that amount, and you still want to offer seller financing, then there's really only one solution. And that is, if you have if you're the seller, Eric, and you have $400,000 of cash liquid somewhere, then you can actually act as a lender for your buyer. So at closing, the buyer is going to bring in $100,000 as their down payment. You, the seller, are going to bring in $400,000 as the lender, right? Because it's weird, right? A seller doesn't bring in cash, but you're wearing 2 hats. You're the lender and you're the seller, right? So at closing, there's $500,000 of cash that came into your close. So now those $500,000 of proceeds are going to come into the exchange account to us, and they're going to end up being equity in the property you buy to replace in your 1031 exchange. So you defer 100% of the tax. And now the note that you have is exactly the same as it would have been if it was an installment sale. It's still seller financing. It's just now a loan. It's not an installment sale, right? So now when you're repaid that loan balance every year, there's no capital gains tax in it, right? You deferred all that. So you're just going to pay ordinary income on the interest earned from that note. From a financial planning standpoint, if you need to do an exchange, that's a beautiful thing, right? Because you've taken $400,000 out of the bank that was maybe earning you 5%. Now it's tied to the property you sold, and maybe it's earning you 6 or 7%, right? And if the buyer defaults, you get the property back, right? And you were able to defer 100% of the tax in the exchange. So it can work with an exchange. If there is no exchange, there is kind of a quasi deferral of the tax through the life of the loan.
I like that. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. And Danielle, I forgot, forgive me, at the beginning, before we started, you asked me about an improvement exchange.
That's right.
Yeah, so I'll just take a couple minutes and explain that to you. So an improvement exchange is where, let's say I sell a property for $1 million and I buy something for $700,000. and I don't want to pay tax on that $300,000 difference. And there are some improvements I would like to have done to the property. And the seller is not willing to do those, right? Because if the seller agrees to do the improvements and just up the sales price, hey, that's beautiful. But very few sellers are willing to do that. They're like, either buy my property as is or get it on my way. So if the seller's not willing to do it, then we have to set up an improvement exchange. That's a complicated exchange. So when the property you're buying closes, you're buying it for $700,000, but you sold for $1 million. So we're holding in excess of $300,000 excess funds. So when the land closes, or when the property closes, you're buying, you, the exchanger, are not going to go on title to that replacement property. We are the intermediary. We're going to create an LLC to hold title to that property, because you can't go on title to it until those improvements are done and it's all considered equal or greater in value. So we create the LLC. You're actually loaning the money to our LLC. We give you a note and deed of trust for that. When it closes, the LLC's the owner of the property. We immediately triple net lease the property back to you, so you have total control of the asset while we're on title to it. Now, we're going to act like a construction lender, and we're going to, at your request, we're going to pay the contractor the various draws as they're doing the improvements. And then once the improvements are done and it's considered real property and it's affixed to the property, then we deed the finished property to you. So that way, when you go on title to it, it's all considered real property and you've got that full $1 million of value in the asset. Two downsides to that structure. The biggest one is the timing. You still have the 180 days, right? That's it. So from the date you sell your relinquished property, that's day 0. You got now 180 days to buy the replacement property and get those improvements done. So you need to have that lined up in advance, right? This can't be kind of a last minute thing, because still today's economy, contractors are still backed up, supply lines can be backed up. So you have to make sure that you can get whatever you need done within the 180 days. That's one downside to it. The other downside is the cost. A regular 1031, if you're just selling a property and buying a property, easy peasy, $1,250 is the total cost for that exchange. That's it, right? Improvement exchange, it's not going to be $1,250. You're probably looking at $7,000 to $8,000 in costs. So that kind of tipping point where it begins to make financial sense is about $50,000. Right? So if you're doing more than $50,000 of improvements on the property, yeah, the improvement exchange makes sense, because the excess fees would be less than the tax hit you'd take if you just, didn't make up that difference and get rid of that boot, right?
So what you need is a disaster.
Yes, yes.
Extra 120 days.
120 days. Yes, yes. You're correct. So I know you're listening now. Yeah. If you need a federally declared disaster to get that 120 days, that's the best way.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
Like the analysis. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. So just know it's possible, right? And if that's something that's, on the horizon in the future, talk to me in advance so that I can help make sure that you got things lined up for success.
Right. It's a lot to think about.
It's a lot to think about. Well, like I said, you don't have to remember anything I said tonight. You just have to remember my phone number, right?
Okay. Thank you.
and you guys can call anytime. And we covered so much ground tonight. This is a lot of ground, and I'm sure I was talking fast. So, as you guys talk about this, it's probably going to spawn some additional questions. So feel free to call me anytime, even with just one simple little question. Call anytime.
Thank you.
And if you guys enjoyed the presentation tonight and you want to do me a little teeny tiny favor, you can put your camera on one of those QR codes and write me a little 5-star review. Feel free to use terms like genius, 1031 guru, stuff like that.
Okay. Genius. Well, I think you are.
Well, thank you. It's very kind.
I'm obviously not. Okay. Thank you for your presentation, and I'm probably going to leave it and think about this whole thing and get back to you. Thank you very much.
Anytime.
Thank you
so much for being there.
Yeah.
All right, thank you. So Russell, if you want to unshare your screen,
Oh, yes, sorry.
I can I think
Probably gonna leave.
reclaim host and I can pause that recording. That way if somebody else wants that recording, then I can have that for you. Where are you? I saw it somewhere. Me. Reclaim host. There we go. So I will thank you so much. I'll go ahead and